Next we've got Travis Ellington. I googled Travis and he's a Southwest Ag innovator and has received a shot in the arm, receiving a bursary to study the ewe behaviour and lamb survival correlation. Thanks very much, Travis, for coming down.
So the project that I'm involved in is looking at improving survival of triplet-bearing ewes and their lambs. So it's a national project funded by MLA and all the partners are there. So we've got collaborators in New Zealand and collaborators over east. So the project's a 3-year project and we've just finished year 2. So I'll just go through about what we've done and what we plan to do this year. So we'll talk about a little bit about the project design. I'll go through some literature that's already out there on triplets and a little bit of stuff that we did with producers in 2019 and 2020 and then some stuff on the experiments that we did last year. So just a little bit of background about why the project came about. As I said, it's funded by MLA, so it came about because reproductive rates are increasing and there's sort of no way around. If we keep increasing reproduction rates, there's no way around decreasing the proportion of triplet-bearing ewes. We'll just have more and more come on as we try to push reproduction rates. And from feedback from farmers that I guess are already in this space, that there's a high animal welfare risk, mainly due to the large losses of ewe and lamb. So you'll see some slides later that will show exactly how high these potentially can be from some survey work we did a couple of years ago. So yeah, I guess importantly the project was selected by producers in consultation with MLA. So yeah, so firstly we've gone to the producers to do a producer needs analysis. So we've gone out and we've done some surveys and so we've done a literature review. So we looked out there and went through lots and lots of scientific papers and worked out what's already out there, so we're not reinventing the wheel. We did some focus groups, depth interviews, so that was from farmers that are, I guess, already in this space in WA and over east and in New Zealand. Just again, so we're not reinventing the wheel. We don't want to come up with some recommendations that have already in the literature are out there and farmers know how to do this. And then we did a couple of, they're called benchmarking surveys. So we've contacted over 100 farmers through the benchmarking surveys. And they were essentially just to look at what are you doing, what's working, and probably more importantly, what's not working, and what do you need further research on. And out of that, we've got it's all on-farm research that we're doing. So we've done, this will be in the next slide, but I guess, the main aim of the project is we've got best practice guidelines for twins and singles, mainly through lifetime ewe management and lifetime maternals, but we don't have any best practice for how we manage triplet-bearing ewes. And although they're a small part now, that we can see in the future as repro rates increase that this number will increase. So I'll just quickly go through a little bit of literature that is out there already. So what do we know about triplets? So they're in a poor metabolic state, they're colder soon after birth, less body reserves, less heat production as they're lighter. So all these things put together mean that they're a lot less likely to survive. So we know all these things are the case, so it's about how to mitigate the risk of the lamb dying. So we've got to work out a way to do that. So we went through the literature again. So the lambs are one part of the story, but the triplet ewes, from consultation with the industry, the triplet-bearing ewes are a lot more likely to die than twin and single bearing ewes. So even though you might have low death rates in your twins and singles, this might be greatly increased in your triplets. And that's largely due to the greater metabolic stress. So things like hypocalcemia and pregnancy toxemia are a massive problem in triplet-bearing ewes. So the project's looking at both the ewes and the lambs and how to keep them alive until marking and longer. So I guess the gaps. Most of the research that's done is done in New Zealand on very small scale. So there's no real information on how to manage these ewes in Australian conditions. So the gaps in lambing and lactation management. I guess the role of supplements in the second point, the role of supplements in lactation and cost effectiveness has not been examined. Again, because all the research is done in New Zealand where supplements aren't generally used. So I'm talking feeding grain to sheep doesn't happen in New Zealand. Whereas in this country, it could serve as a valuable, I guess, extra feed source, even if there's enough grass ahead of them, maybe just to keep that ewe alive until she has her lambs. So yeah, just to reiterate, most interventions tested to date, they're relatively small numbers. So the biggest, I guess we know about the metabolic stress on the ewe, we know that the lamb's less likely to survive, but all of these are done with 50 to 100 ewes. So part of the project is to try and get some scale in the experiments so we can, I guess, say with some confidence that these things will improve triplet ewe and lamb survival. So I guess to the first set of results that we got, so we did some surveys in 2018 and 2019. We did over 100 surveys and we talked to farmers that have been managing triplets separately along with farmers that haven't, and asked them a few different questions. So I guess the question that we asked to farmers that don't scan is, why don't you? So the biggest one is not enough triplets. Remembering that the farmers haven't scanned for triplets in the past, so they don't. So not enough triplets, time and paddock constraints, and I guess the scanner. There's a little bit about the scanner error and whether or not the scanner is willing and able to do it. Because, as I said, in New Zealand, majority of scanners can. In Australia, yeah, it's probably not the case that majority can. So I guess just to focus on that, the first point, most people said there's not enough triplets. So in our data set, is there a pointer on there? Yeah. So in our data set, on average, farmers scanned 150%. So this line here is the average. So on average, they scan 150%, but if they scanned for triplets, they would actually be scanning 156%. So farmers that are scanning 150% at the moment have more than likely got 6% triplets, and potentially more, because as you can see, there's a lot of noise around the line, and there's a few dots up here. So this, yeah. So for example, 150, but he's probably scanning closer to 160. So he might have somewhere between 5 to 10% triplets. And if you're up at 170, obviously that relationship's a lot bigger. So I guess the point is that just probably not the case. There's not that many farmers scanning 150 plus, but I guess in good years and very seasonal, if we have a good year and if there's green grass while you're mating, all those things that improve reproduction, you could end up having a substantial amount of triplets in your flock. So I guess don't discount it, to the farmers out there, don't discount it and say, well, we don't have any triplets, because my advice would be have a look and see, get your scanner to have a look at 500 ewes, won't take him very long. And if he doesn't find any triplets, then that's great, but he might. So I guess that graph says that we should look and see, because we can't really make a call until we've got all the information in front of us. So yeah, that just goes across the breeds. So yeah, farmers with the broiler gene obviously had a massive triplet rate, maternal farmers across the country, and then merinos with the lowest. But again, there's plenty of merino farmers that are scanning 150 to 160 plus. So lamb survival. So the data that I'm about to show you is lamb survival data collected from farmers. So it's not anything we've collected, so it's all survey data. And I guess the interesting thing with this data is the range. So non-merino farmers nationally scanned 185%, but the range was anywhere between 125 to 275. So that's across years and across farms. So, and I think that's the thing that farmers kept saying time and time again is they might get one good year where they get 200% out of their triplets, and they think, oh, well I've solved it. You know, I'll do the same thing next year, and they'll do what they've thought is the same thing, and they'll get a lot less result, and they might get a terrible year, like, you know, down at the 125, which is less than what they were getting in their twins. So I guess that range is the thing that has led to this research too, to say we are getting it right sometimes, so it's possible, but how do we get it right more often? And then we asked farmers, what do you think's affecting lamb survival on your farms? So interestingly, they said very similar things about triplets as I said about their twins lambs. So things like mismothering, exposure. So all the things that we know is affecting lamb survival, farmers brought up. So then we asked them a few questions about ewe survival, what their average ewe survival was. And these numbers were probably a little bit more, I guess, shocking and confronting, particularly if you talk about the range. So that's meant to be a 4, but it's still 40% ewe losses in one triplet-bearing mob. So merinos had a higher ewe death rate, and WA had a higher ewe death rate too, largely driven by that 25%. But I guess the point with these are not the people that are getting 25% in their triplets, they're only getting 5% in their twins. So they're sort of industry average for their twins, but every now and again, for whatever reason, they'll have, for reasons that they can't think of why it would happen, they'll have 20% of their triplet-bearing ewes die. So that's obviously a massive cost to the industry, as well as the animal welfare aspect that I brought up earlier. So again, we asked farmers why you think ewes are dying. So pregnancy toxemia was a big one. The next biggest was too heavy, can't walk. So this is particularly in non-merino ewes. So farmers thought, well, they've got 3 lambs, so we've got to give them as much feed as possible and pile half a condition score on them. So you're taking a ewe, 70 kilo ewe from condition score 3, putting 3 lambs inside her and then putting half a condition score on her, and then particularly in wetter years and the foot problems and that kind of stuff that you probably don't see in your singles and twins start happening. So that's what I guess that farmers were indicating to us. So from here, we've presented this information at forums across the country, and then we've asked farmers at the forums that were involved in the previous research to say, look, these are the results, this is what you've been telling us. What do you think needs to be researched in terms of managing triplet-bearing ewes better? So yeah, we're very much gone out to the industry with this and said, what do you think needs researching? And then we have enough money to test 5. So 5 that we started testing last year and will hopefully complete this year were, so mob size at lambing. So again, that's been, there's a fair bit of media around that for twin bearing ewes. Condition score profile at lambing, And the condition score one's probably big because it's farmers want us to look at both ewe and lamb survival. So important in both merino and maternal sheep. Further on offer and supplementation. So this was mainly around looking at even if they've got enough feed on offer in front of them, does a little bit of grain supplementation help in very late pregnancy and throughout lambing to make sure those metabolic disorders like pregnancy toxemia don't happen. So we'd had a few sites on that last year. We'll continue to do some this year. Mineral supplementation. So I guess interestingly, a lot of people swear by mineral supplementation across their flock, and a lot of people don't use any mineral supplementation. And interestingly, farmers from both camps thought this was important. They might not do it with their twins and their singles, but they thought, well, there's a little bit of extra pressure on this triplet-bearing ewe, maybe some minerals will help. And then the last one, mixed versus managed. So I guess that's trying to identify the benefit of separating your triplets. So if you've got 5-10%, like the survey the average survey farmer does, what is the benefit in separating them in terms of, and probably the big one with that is resource allocation. Obviously you've got a limited amount of paddocks that are suitable for lambing on your farm. Are we best saying these triplets, you can get a massive gain out of them, or we'll not worry about the triplets and try and manage our multiples better across the whole farm? So yeah, I guess that one's interesting. So this last year we did 22 experiments across the country, 8 of them being in WA. So the drought over east didn't really help this experiment, particularly with scanning rates and stuff last year. So hopefully with a bit of rain that they've had this year, a few blokes will be scanning a bit higher and have a few more triplets. So the sites completed in 2019. So you'll see, 8 in WA. And so most sites, we've only done a third of the sites that are needed, except mob size. So we do have some results on mob size, but the rest of the sites, I guess we've got some ideas about what the results might be, but they're not really robust enough for me to be saying this is what condition score ewes need to be at, triplet-bearing ewe needs to be at. So hopefully at the end of this year we'll have some really robust recommendations about condition score and feed on offer particularly. But we've got some results on mob size which I'll show you. So I guess some interesting stuff. So this is from the data that we collected. So maternal ewes in high condition score had higher mortality. So that sort of marries up with what the farmers were saying. So again, there was only 3 sites, and that result's largely driven by one site that had really high mortality, particularly in his high condition score ewes. But it'd be interesting to see whether that continues for the next 7 sites. But I guess in contrast, high condition score improved lamb survival in both merino and maternal sheep. So even though it's killing more ewes, the high condition score is producing bigger lambs that are more likely to survive, which we know is the case in twins. So I guess it's about trying to find out where that condition score is. So hopefully with the next 7 sites that we've got to do this year, that information will come to hand and we'll be able to give a little bit better precise condition score measurement of what they need to be at. But I guess the big result from last year was that smaller mobs and lambing had higher lamb survival. So this is the graph that we've made about that. So essentially, the smaller the better. So I'll go through a bit of an example of how that could be implemented on farm in a little bit. But I guess the point is that as small as you can possibly get them. So we get some really big results across a few sites that we're getting sort of up to 20% extra lamb survival by cutting their mobs in half from 150 to 75%. So I think there's some really big gains in triplet-bearing ewes in terms of land survival to be gained in this space. And particularly, I guess the key thing to have is you might have, if you've got 5,000 ewes, you might have a lot of twin-bearing ewes, but you don't have many triplet-bearing ewes. It's only a couple hundred ewes that you're sort of focusing on, rather than all these twin-bearing ewes that you need to put in smaller mobs. So I guess just a bit of an example. So let's say you have 140 triplet-bearing ewes. So as I said, if you're mating anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 ewes, you've probably got this amount. If you put them in 7 mobs, 20 mobs per lambing, lamb survival is 67, so you get 385 lambs alive at marking. But if you say, I'm only going to put them in 2 mobs, you get 57% lamb survival, which is 240. So by splitting them up that little bit more, you've saved 43 lambs. And I guess just to point out, people are splitting their triplets up in pretty novel ways. Some big cropping guys say, we'll just put 20 on a crop, so put 20 on a 100 hectare crop, and 20 triplet-bearing ewes aren't really doing much damage, and they're picking paddocks that I guess have got a lot of non-arable land on them. So they've got a couple of tree lines and a big dam and that kind of stuff. So they're not really on the crop that much either. So they're not affecting the yield of the crop. And then little things like putting them in creek lines and that kind of stuff. So areas that I guess aren't, this is just during lambing, areas that aren't necessarily utilised that much on your farm anyway, and just putting them in there out of the way and then bringing them in and getting some pretty good results, rather than saying, I have to split that paddock up 7 ways to make this work. There's a few novel ways that people are doing it. So I guess the big one is how to be involved this year. The most simple experiment that we're doing this year with 4 mobs of 30 triplet-bearing ewes. So for the condition score, one, for example, would be 2 mobs of low condition score and 2 mobs of high condition score. So you need a minimum of 120 triplet-bearing ewes. And I guess the key about the research that we're trying to do is that we really want all our research at Murdoch to be conducted on farm, particularly lamb survival stuff, because it's been proven time and time again that the stuff that's done at research stations and not on farm in real commercial conditions isn't that useful for farmers, whereas research done on farms with farmers in terms of lamb survival is very useful. So we want the relationship to be a two-way street. We want the farmers to benefit, or the farm that we're doing the research on, we want them to benefit by, I guess, gaining the knowledge before everybody else does and trying things out while we're there. And then, we benefit by, I guess, we keep getting funded. If anybody's interested or they know anyone that might be interested, and even if you're worried that you might not have enough triplet-bearing ewes, I guess the other thing to point out too is we want this to be cost neutral for farmers. So if they see anything that they think, that's going to cost me money, for example, extra scanning, we've got a bit of a budget to make sure that if you're willing to do the experiment on your farm, I guess we're willing to make it cost neutral for you. So, thank you. Any questions?
I've got a question too.
Yeah.
Did you consider timing of lambing? Because if they lamb in the warmer months to retain their temperature rather than in the winter cold months. And the other one is to do with your mob size, and was DSC taken into consideration how big the paddock was?
Yes. So I'll answer the mob size one first because it's easier. With the mob size, all the experiments, the stocking rate was the same. So if you had 20 ewes, then that's on half as big a paddock as if you had 40 ewes. Does that answer the question? Yeah. So and I guess, and with the research into twins, we looked at stocking rate. This is through Amy Lockwood's PhD. And most of that stuff with the stocking rate didn't really have an effect on lamb survival. Mob size had a much greater effect. So that's why we haven't, I guess, decided to look at if we spread our triplets out, whether that's going to make a difference. Because from the research on twins, it says that it probably won't. And I guess to answer your question about time of lambing, we have looked at, I guess, the survey data in terms of time of lambing, and there's nothing in the data to say that if you lamb in August, you're going to get a better triplet lamb survival than lambing in May, and that's across the country. So, yeah, I would suggest that, I guess, you're probably more likely to have adverse weather conditions in July than in May, but then you're more likely to have green grass in July than May. So I think those two things would more than cancel them out to say that lambing on green grass with triplets particularly would cancel out any adverse weather effects. And yeah, I guess further to that point, there's farmers in Portland in Victoria, which is 1,000 mil rainfall zone and very close to Antarctica, and they're getting 200% out of their triplet-bearing ewes. So I think the weather conditions, I don't think plays a massive part in it. I think the amount of the condition score and the mob size and I guess the amount of green grass they've got in front of them is more important.
Travis, we tend to have large paddocks. Any tips on making small ones temporarily, especially with regards to water and fencing?
Water's an interesting one though, because that, again, it depends on your time of lambing and how much water you need. If you've got 20 triplet-bearing ewes, there's people, putting IBCs out with a trough next to it, and electric fencing. And then there's also farmers that would say that during lambing, if you're lambing in August or July with your triplets, then you may not even need to consider water. So, well, there's a farmer in western Victoria, which obviously a bit more rain than Kojana, but they split their paddocks up with electric fencing, and they went from getting 180% in their triplets to 240 in 1 year, and they don't put any water out. So it's only during the point of lambing. So
I just had a question. I was thinking about the fertility rate, and I was wondering at what point it actually becomes worthwhile scanning with triplets.
I would suggest a little bit probably depends on the amount of ewes you've got, but I'd suggest that anything above 150, it'd be worthwhile having a look. And then once you're above 160, then you could potentially, if you're scanning 160, you could potentially have 10% triplets. So 10% of your ewe mobs, of your ewes is a lot for some people. And then if those ewe death rates are happening in those triplets that I showed, then potentially that's an area that you could make some gains.
Should I just check in that when you're looking at the national and the WA averages, the WA averages, was that merino and non-merino?
Yeah. So, and yeah, it was probably 50-50.
In one of your slides you had merino, Concord and Barula.
Yeah.
What's that one?
So they've got a fertility gene in them. So one copy of the gene will increase ovulation rate by 40%. So therefore so most people with Barula sheep are getting scanning 200%.
No, they are across it.
Yeah. So they're mainly ovaries. There are 2 farmers in WA that have so someone's identified the gene and then bred a sheep and then,
Is the average wheat farmer better off identifying triplets and selling?
That's an interesting point that comes up more often than you think. Well, I guess it all depends on what your system is, really. But I think that with good management, I don't think there's any reason why we can't work out how to keep them alive. So.
Thanks, Travis.